All right, let's talk about something that's literally built into every single one of our brains, mental shortcuts. Today, we're going to explore how this basic survival tool, which we call bias, can start as a simple snap judgment and scale all the way up into a system that shapes our entire world. Let's dive in.
I mean, come on, we all do it, right? That instant feeling you get about someone, or that little bit of comfort when you read an article that just confirms everything you already believed. Well, those aren't just random quirks. That's your brain's shortcut system in action, and it's designed for pure speed. But here's the big question. What happens when that efficiency comes at a cost?
So let's get a really clear definition on the table. At its core, bias is just a tendency, a lean towards something or against something. It's a mental shortcut. And hey, it's not always a bad thing. Like, you might be biased toward people who are supportive, which is great. But it often relies on stereotypes instead of individual facts, which helps our brain make quick but sometimes really flawed judgments.
Just think about it for a second. Our brains are absolutely flooded with information every single moment of every day. To keep from getting totally overwhelmed, they create these shortcuts to make faster decisions. It's how we sort through the noise. But, and this is a big but, it can also lead to systematic errors in our thinking, causing us to make rash judgments or even discriminatory choices.
Okay, so these shortcuts, they operate on two totally different levels. You've got the bias that we're actually aware of, and then there's the bias that's kind of running in the background, shaping our actions without us even knowing it's there. Let's break that down.
And this is where we see this crucial split between what we think we believe and how we actually behave. Implicit bias is the unconscious, automatic stuff. And get this, it can often predict our behavior much more accurately than our own conscious values can. Wild, right? Explicit bias, on the other hand, is what we're aware of. It's conscious, it's deliberate, and it often pops up when we feel some kind of threat. To make this a little more real, let's look at a few common types of unconscious bias you might recognize. There's affinity bias. That's that natural pull we feel toward people who remind us of, well, us. Then you've got confirmation bias, which is our brain's sneaky little habit of only looking for information that proves we were right all along. And, of course, stereotyping. That's when we take a broad, often distorted idea and apply it to an entire group of people. And this brings us to how this implicit bias often shows up in the real world, through microaggressions. These are those everyday comments or actions, sometimes intentional but often they're not, that send these subtle negative messages to people based on their identity. They're basically the tangible results of our unconscious biases leaking out into our daily interactions.
So far, we've really been focused on what's going on inside an individual's mind. But what happens when these mental shortcuts start to scale up? How does a single thought inside one person's head transform into a massive society-wide system?
Well, it starts with just a single thought. An individual's unconscious bias becomes prejudice, which is really just an opinion about someone that's based not on who they are as a person, but on the group they belong to.
Then, when that prejudice is shared across a whole group of people, it provides the fuel for the next step up, discrimination. And this is when those biased thoughts turn into unfair actions, like denying someone an opportunity or just treating them differently based on a stereotype.
And this, right here, is the final leap. When that discrimination becomes so common, so ingrained, that it gets embedded right into our institutions, our laws, our company policies, the way things have always been done, that's when an individual bias becomes systemic.
So, and this is a really crucial point, systemic bias isn't necessarily about individuals having bad intentions. It's about the institutions themselves. Government, education, finance, you name it, where the actual policies and practices, even if they don't explicitly mention any group, just end up creating different outcomes for different people. They create advantages for some and disadvantages for others.
To see just how profoundly this can work, let's zoom in on a powerful, real-world example: bias in the housing market.
So first, a little context. A home appraisal is what determines the official value of a house. That single number is absolutely critical when you buy, sell, or refinance. And for most families, their home equity is the cornerstone of building generational wealth.
But what happens when bias seeps into that valuation? The consequences are absolutely massive. As tons of research has shown, racial and ethnic bias in appraisals can strip families of billions, that's billions with a B, of dollars in home equity. It directly continues that cycle of inequality.
This problem is so significant that it's prompted a major federal response. A task force called PAVE was created for the specific purpose of evaluating this problem and creating a plan to root racial and ethnic bias out of the home valuation system entirely.
Okay, so understanding the problem is definitely the first step, but, it's not enough. So how can we actively counter bias from inside our own minds all the way up to our biggest institutions?
Well, it looks like we can take action on 3 different levels. It has to start with us, on a personal level, through some honest self-examination. From there, it extends to our workplaces, where we can build respectful and inclusive environments. And finally, it demands action at the systemic level, where we can actually redesign the processes that create these unfair outcomes in the first place.
And this is a brilliant illustration of a systemic fix. It's called the bifurcated appraisal. Basically, the whole process is redesigned to reduce the chance for an individual's bias to creep in. So one person inspects the property and just gathers objective data. Then that data, and only that data, gets sent off for analysis. And finally, a completely separate appraiser completes the valuation using only the data, without ever having seen the property, the owner, or the neighborhood. The decision is based on facts, not feelings.
Technology is also playing a huge role here. Tools like 3D laser scanners can create these incredibly precise digital models of a home. This kind of objective data replaces a lot of subjective guesswork, which empowers appraisers to make faster and, most importantly, much fairer valuations.
So we've seen that bias is a natural part of how our brains work. It's a system of shortcuts designed for efficiency. But we've also seen how these shortcuts can lead to deeply unfair outcomes when they're left unchecked. The challenge, then, isn't to somehow eliminate these shortcuts. That's probably impossible. The real challenge is to become aware of them, which leads to one final question for you. Knowing that your brain is wired for shortcuts, which one will you choose to pause and question today?